Today I'm going to be talking about Mother Any Distance by Simon Armitage. And from the title of the poem, we can see that it is about a parent and child relationship, a mother and child relationship. And the connotations of a mother is someone that is caring, protective, strong, but also mother is quite a formal way to say your mother. Like you could say mom, mother, mummy, but then we can, from that title, we can kind of see the relationship between the narrator and the mother, and we'll delve into that more when we read the poem. Before I read the poem, I'm going to give some context. Simon Armitage was born in Huddersfield, West Yorkshire, in a village, and he's a postgraduate student at Manchester University. And he got his master's, and he was interested in violence on TV and how that affected young offenders. And from that, he then became a probation officer. For context that is closer to the theme of the poem, Simon Armitage actually moved out of his parents' house and then immediately moved into another house, but directly next to his parents' house. And in the poem, we can kind of see how that might correlate. The poem was also in a collection of poems called Book of Matches. And the concept of this is that all the poems can be read by the time a match runs out. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to do that, but I'll do my best to try and read it as it should be read. Mother Any Distance, greater than a single span, requires a second pair of hands. You come to help me measure windows, pelmets, doors, the acres of the walls, the prairies of the floors. You at the zero end, me with the spool of tape, recording length, reporting meters, centimeters, back to base, then leaving up the stairs, the line still feeding out, unreeling years between us, anchor, kite. I spacewalk through the empty bedrooms, climb the ladder to the loft, to breaking point, where something has to give. 2 floors below your fingertips still pinch, the last 1/100th of an inch. I reach towards a hatch that opens on an endless sky, to fall or fly. Now I'm going to analyse each of the stanzas chronologically, and of course starting with the first stanza. So it starts off by saying, Mother Any Distance greater than a single span requires a second pair of hands. And that first line runs over onto the second line, which is called enjambment. And this shows that the narrator already does not have much control. And that is shown when the first word they use in the poem is mother. The first stanza and debatably the whole poem is also quite nostalgic when the narrator uses nouns like span. Span isn't a conventional word that you use in your adulthood. Not saying that I know much about adulthood anyway, but it isn't a precise or concise measurement value. The narrator then continues using the childish language when they use the noun prairie. Prairies is quite a naive phrase to use, and it shouldn't be the first choice to use when you've moved into a new house, which is what the setting of the poem is. It is also quite hyperbolic because the narrator has said the acres of the walls, the prairies of the floors, and realistically you wouldn't have acres on walls, as acres is quite a big value, and prairies of the floors as well. It's quite juxtaposing because prairies are outdoor, whereas a floor is usually indoors. What is also very childish is the narrator's use of asyndetic listing from lines 3 to 4, where they start off by saying, you come to help me measure windows, pelmets, doors, the acres of the walls, the prairies of the floors. And this can be seen as childish because the narrator is going on and on and on like a child would, but it's also quite overwhelming. The narrator seems overwhelmed the fact that you, the mother, is coming to help measure all these things that the narrator could probably do by themselves. Now onto the second stanza, which starts off by saying, you at the zero end, me with the spool of tape, recording length, reporting meters, centimeters, back to base, then leaving up the stairs, the line still feeding out, unreeling years between us, anchor, kite. And you may have noticed that there is a lexical field of measurement, and that is shown in the first stanza with distance greater, span, requires a second pair of hands, measure, acres, prairies, and in the second stanza with the first line which says you at the zero end, me with a spool of tape, recording, and then using nouns like meters, centimeters, and then the last line of the second stanza, years between us, anchor kite. Now, the lexical field or semantic field of measurement, shows that physical distance, but then it also symbolizes difference. The difference is kind of expected when a child is growing up. There's going to be that relational difference. There's going to be that growth that is kind of like a realization, and that is shown when it says, you at the zero end. The mother is at one stage of their life and the child is moving on. They're now recording lengths, reporting meters, doing all these parental roles that the mother was once doing. The mother's now starting again at the zero end. But then this is then juxtaposed when the narrator says back to base. And this has connotations of attachment. They have this distance, but no matter what, the narrator will be back to base. A base is somewhere that's strong, that has a strong foundation. Back to base is also quite a nostalgic phrase, like when children play tag, there's always a base, which is where you know you're safe. You know that no matter who's out there, you know that the base is and will always be somewhere that you have that cloud of safety. The lexical field of measurement is then juxtaposed with that back to base feeling of attachment. And this isn't the only place in that stanza that is somewhat juxtaposing. The last two words, anchor kite. An anchor is a support system that goes deep into the sea and ensures that the ship doesn't sail away. Whereas a kite is an object that needs a strong support on its base to then float up in the sky. And these two are quite juxtaposing. However, they both have some sense of freedom. For example, a kite, it has the freedom to fly in the sky, but it's still being held down. An anchor, for a period of time when the ship is sailing, it isn't down in the ocean having to provide that ship with a sense of security. So they both have periods of freedom, but they both bring stability. And stability is essentially what all children need when they're growing up, regardless of their situation. And it's still something that possibly adults need as well when they're growing up. So although the two on the outside seem like literal opposites, with one in the sky, one in the ocean, put together they could not be more stable and more similar. Anchor kite, you can look at those with language analysis, but structurally they're also quite strong and blunt, because the narrator has kind of just spewed out everything they want to say with enjambments, these long complex sentences which make the reader feel extremely overwhelmed, similar to what the narrator might feeling having to do all these mature actions. But then anchor kite just stops all that. Anchor kite, having two one-word sentences completely stop the track of these fast-flowing enjambments is a very big contrast, and it's another one of the many contrasts throughout this poem, which then shows again the complex situation that the mother and child are in, which is not uncommon. Some very important imagery is also shown in the poem, shown in the quotes. The line still feeding out. I spacewalk through empty bedrooms and towards a hatch that opens on an endless sky to fall or fly. The line still feeding out has images of the umbilical cord, when the cord that essentially gives life to the baby. It gives the baby all the nutrients and things it needs to stay alive. And that's also connected with spacewalking. When an astronaut goes spacewalking, there's a cord that connects them to the base to ensure that they don't float away and then, of course, unfortunately, lose their life. Spacewalking is also quite adventurous and it's very independent, and it's not an everyday thing. You don't casually go spacewalking, and it shows that the narrator has a sense of independence. They don't want to do something that they have to rely on their parent for, which is quite rebellious as well. It's rebellious, but it's also a very huge risk that the narrator is clearly willing to take, although it might be spacewalking through bedrooms. The last quote that I want to talk about in regards to imagery is that of a baby bird, a chick, and its mother/parents. So when a baby bird has grown, there's a time that it has to leave the nest, and when it leaves, the parent will unfortunately kick it out of the nest and will either fall to its death or fly, which is a very big risk for the parent. And it shows that the narrator is acknowledging that the parent has gone through some risks, and so have they with the spacewalking. But it also shows that there's hope. There's hope that they will fall or fly, and the endless sky kind of represents the open world out there. There's an unknown world out there that is huge, and it covers a big area. Although there is still a lot of imagery and analysis that I could go into, I'm now going to move into the form of the poem, which moves on quite a bit with the rhyme scheme. And at first, the rhyme scheme is very close and obvious, where it says span, hands, doors, floors at the end of each sentence, which is an AABB rhyme scheme. But then in the second stanza, things change quite drastically, whereas the rhyme scheme then moves to the middle. It's internal rhyme, which shows things kind of are becoming more personal rather than pleasing, because it says spool of tape back to base, and this is like in the middle. It's kind of moving away from the conventional rhyme scheme. And then it says unreeling years between us. It's very sudden and unconventional. It's not what we expect, which may show that the narrator isn't looking to please the parents. And it also shows that the narrator isn't going by the rules. Then I'm going to now move on to the last lines, where there's a rhyming couplet which says sky and fly. And this rhyming couplet shows that the narrator, although the narrator has broken many rules before this, they're still mother and child. They're still together, and they still have a bond that people expect of them. You may have noticed that it is a sonnet form, which is unusual when talking about parental relationships. But that last line, a sonnet is meant to be 14 lines, but the last line, which is what in fact makes it more of a sonnet, breaks the sonnet form, because the narrator could have left it there with the 14th line by saying, I reach towards a hatch that opens on an endless sky. It isn't too drastic by not having that last half a line, which shows that it's kind of forced and unnatural, which is unfortunate for a relationship that is meant to be natural and already have that bond. And it highlights that the child is admitting that they might not succeed in their dependent life, that they're either going to fall or fly, and that they're not going to go the conventional way by having just 14 lines, and that they're kind of accepting that. Overall, the poem can be read as covering the changing nature of parent-child relationships. It is loosely formed as a sonnet, and sonnets are coming from a genre of love poetry, and in this sonnet, there is no organised rhyme scheme, and this unstable use of the sonnet form reflects the unstable relationship, which is also shown through the constant juxtapositions in the stanzas. And so I'm done. Thank you for listening.